Good morning. Can you guys hear me? I just tested it, so it should be okay. Yeah, cool. Good morning. I was just having a conversation with the course about comfort zones because we've talked about the wall of fear, as being sort of like the furthest extent of your belief systems. And so then I was asking them about all those experiences of stepping outside of your comfort zone intentionally when you know it's something new and different and challenging for you. And they were basically like, well, is it inspired? They always come back to, is it inspired? And I think that's hard because when you're facing something you're afraid of, it doesn't feel like all light and sunshine and rainbows inspired. You know what I mean? Like sometimes dragging yourself out of your comfort zone, it's not the same as like I feel inspired to bake brownies right now. They're not the same. So we started talking about the sensation of inspiration and they were basically like if you are continually drawn to the idea of stepping outside of your comfort zone in this way, so much so that you eventually do it, that is a way of interpreting inspiration in the five senses. Isn't that interesting? I think, I don't know, many things are becoming more fluid for me right now. Just they're just loosening. They're all expanding. I'm seeing things from many different perspectives. And I think now I'm starting to realize that I may have had a more narrow definition of inspiration than I even realized. And now that they're pointing out different versions of inspiration, it really comes back to that you really can't mess it up. Even when it's, like, super ugly, like, you're crawling through this experience of coming out of your comfort zone, you're sure you're doing it wrong, like, it's really haphazard. They're like, "Yeah, that's inspired." Like, you were drawn to it so much over and over again that you kept moving in some way in that direction and until it manifested. So it's like, well, shoot. Well, then if I can feel like that and I'm following inspiration and I can feel like amazing and I'm following inspiration, it loosens everything so much that now the question for me becomes then when would you not be following inspiration, which I'm sure we all have answers for. When it feels like oppressive, heavy, like you're pushing somebody else's needs uphill, that's probably a good sense of not inspired, but I think inspiration just got a lot bigger for me. Melinda says, "Yep, yeah." I mean, I don't know, I'm pretty stoked. Maybe I'm more inspired more of the time than I think I am. So how are you all this morning? I can't wait to hear your questions. The chorus can't wait either. Well, they can because they're infinite. So I will go ahead and bring them through and they'll have a chat and then feel free to come up on stage or submit a question or anything you like. Great. All right. Dear ones, you are coming to understand the vastness of what you are. We have said perhaps these words many times, and there are perhaps concepts currently in your belief systems that allow you to imagine what this vastness might be and represent. However, now you are starting to come into specific examples in your day to day reality that represent your vastness. That is to say, that there are things that you are affecting, and there are things that you are doing all the time. Your energetic self is real. It is an active and real time aspect of what you are right now as you sit here listening to us. It is very busy. It does many things all day long. What you constructed here was not necessarily a separation from this energetic part of yourself. It was an inability to perceive it. As others have said before us, it would be greatly impossible to separate yourself from that which you are, which is abundant life, infinite energy, connection to source, creation, and all that is. Therefore, what you are walking through now as you are awakening is a reconnection to the perception of this energetic part of yourself. There are and will be many ways to describe these aspects. You could say it is an energetic part in the singular, as in a unified aspect of what you each are. You could also very reasonably describe the different aspects of this energetic part or parts and what they each do. There will be many ways for you all to define these things and to discuss them, to understand them, and to share perspectives about them. So, suffice it to say that as you are going through your days, right now, in this current time, there will be moments where you feel a pervasiveness of being. You might describe this as confidence, self reliance, ease. What you are sensing, in fact, are the aspects of yourself that are already acting in those directions. Humans in the five senses tend to view their ability to affect things in their environment as limited perhaps by what they might physically touch or physically talk about or physically communicate about. Thereby, your circle of impact, you could say, is limited to who you know, who you are asking for help from or contacting, what they might do and what you might do. Your spheres of influence are rather small by our perspective, where we see how our energetic selves might impact, affect, or connect to all life on the infinite spectrum. This is why it is easy for us to love each of you. By way of creation being an infinite spectrum, that means that all points in that spectrum are infinitely connectable to, meaning there is an energetic part of us that is able to energetically connect to each of you. Humanity does not often experience this in the five senses, and that is because it was not your objective to do so here. Instead, it was your goal, it was your desire to experience what existence might be like disconnected from these aspects of yourself. This is what created the experience of alone and loneliness. This is what created the experience of mystery and unknown, where you must guess about things. And this also created the experience of disconnection from the rest of the universe, where truly only those you might be able to feel a connection with are those you physically see, physically hear, or physically touch. When in reality, our reality, outside of this environment, it is completely possible to connect to far more life in far more ways, far more of the time. This growing confidence and ease and self reliance that you will continue to feel are your knowingnesses about these parts of yourself that are real and that are powerful and that bring to you again a wholeness and a completeness of your perspective, where you feel like each situation is partially known because it has been partially invited, partially resonated with by you. Your sense of your own ability to navigate these energies will result in that happiness. Perhaps we could say that humanity has long sought, and you have long sought it because that was the beginning of your awakening and recognizing that perhaps there could be a different existence. And in that longing, you began the journey of relaxing these belief systems, of beginning to wonder what else might there be in the universe and within yourselves. You created stories, analogies, depictions of these parts of you that you thought might exist. And here you are today, having a conversation with those of us who exist very much in the perception of these things and have benefited greatly by being able to communicate with all of you from your perspective of not being perceiving of these things. Your contrast is a great gift to us, and we will be appreciative of these things always. And so, what questions do you have for us today? I felt that one. Wonder if you guys did too. We have a question from Melinda. Thanks, Melinda. Jane, that was reassuring. Yeah, I felt that too. Thank you. All right, Melinda's question. For most of my life, I have had connection and communication with something that I have described many different ways: my inner being, spirit guides, and more. Is there a difference between them? And for Katie, how did you know you were speaking to someone other than yourself? Great question. So I think I'll let them answer first, and then my answer might make more sense. Okay, so I'll bring them back through. Would it make sense to you, dear one, that in your concept of your inner voice, there is a doorway out of this environment to the rest of the universe and creation, where there are many beings and many ways of existing and life? You had to start somewhere. Humanity did, we mean, in your belief system complex. Prior to the idea of an inner voice, there was a void. There was nothing. You were so wholly engrossed in the five senses perspective that it did not occur to you that there might be another aspect of yourself, and truly you had no manifestations on these wavelengths to represent that possibility. As you began to expand, that possibility became more clear to you of connection beyond this environment. One of the first concepts that reflected that possibility was something that you all call your inner voice, or your larger being, perhaps. A concept that is connected to you as the individual, but represents a hidden aspect of yourself. Perhaps it is sometimes referred to as simply the subconscious, or the unconscious mind, or the ego. There was a sense that there were other things acting upon you, or perceptive versions of you, and you began to construct beliefs that helped you to explain what that might be in your reality. Now, here we will make the first distinction. The first distinction is that there is a difference between the voice or voices of your belief systems and you, as you are an innate, creative, source of all life being that is resonant with a frequency that produces these belief systems. Therefore, we can understand how for humanity at this juncture, this might feel a little confusing, very nuanced, because it is you who are energizing these beliefs. Therefore, as you place your attention on something, there is a response. This you know well. If you are dwelling on a certain topic, more thoughts will come to you. In recent time periods, humans have begun to have a sensation of, am I doing the thinking, or is the thinking doing me? This is an important and growing perception of the difference between you, the energetic being that you are, and thought, meaning the belief systems, which are simply a reflection of your resonance. This, you might say, is quite different than your inner being, your larger self, your voice. And that is true. This is one of the first distinctions that humanity is making that is leading you down the exit ramp, you could say, out into the infinite universe. This distinction is an important step for many on the path of awakening, that they begin to recognize their thinking and they begin to recognize their feeling, their beingness as two separate things. And this is true. Now, as you continue to follow the pathway of that beingness and that entity that you are, you may begin to hear different voices like ours and others. Here we would say that your perceptions are true and are real, and in the beginning, that is really what matters most. The clarity that you seek about who's talking and what am I perceiving comes to you by way of continuing to explore these voices. We would suggest that the more voices you communicate with, the more evident it will become when it is you, your deepest heart, your soul, something from within you, and when it is something else out there. The more you accrue, you could say, experience in communicating with other beings, the more obvious this becomes. We would also say that there is then a third step. The first being perhaps a fourth step by way of human thinking. The first being no distinction at all. The second being a distinction between your thinking self and your energetic self. The third being more and growing distinctions between what you are perceiving energetically, which other beings are out there versus you yourself. And the fourth being a multidimensional ability to detect the difference between a being that you are perceiving and what they are resonant upon. Just as you all are the source of all life, infinitely unique, and have your own energetic signatures unto the universe, and have chosen to resonate on a frequency of disallowance, there are other beings who have unique signatures, but have chosen to resonate in a particular place. This will be the difference that you will perceive between an embodiment that they are enjoying and the larger self that they are. This will become vital to you as you all awaken, and you will begin to recognize those around you in this environment who are a being, an entity, something unique that is choosing to have all the fun of limitation in this game. And by that vantage point, it will be very easy for you to understand, to feel when someone is ready for awakening, for expansion, despite what they are embodying, that is, saying, acting, behaving in the five senses. Though from the five senses alone, this may look like just another unconscious human in an experience of limitation, you will be able to perceive both at once. What their larger energetic self is up to, and also interacting with them in the five senses playing field. So this is Katie. I'll pause there. So did that help? I mean, did some of their answers make sense? And then I can kind of pick up from there. Yes, they did. Great. So I will say I have gone through exactly what they described. So in the first, phase, I guess you could say I just had all of these moments of like pulling up and seeing what I was thinking about. A lot of that happened as I was listening to Abraham. So for 5 or 6 years, really, I was like, why do I keep thinking this stuff? Like, there are these moments, sometimes exhausting, of just like, what is happening? Like, where do these thoughts keep coming from? And a lot of it stemmed from, all those trying to be positive exercises. At first they were really working. And then I, came to a phase of like, shouldn't this be done by now? Like, where does this keep coming from? Like, why do I have to keep fighting it? Which sort of led to their second phase of sort of opening up to the idea of my energetic self versus my belief systems, which is a real difference, and recognizing those differences more and more. And then the third phase was opening up to, okay, well, what else could I know with my energetic self? And a reflection of that came through as the concept of channeling. I think it can come through in a number of ways. I have friends who are psychic mediums. I have friends who are intuitive coaches. There's different ways of opening up to the energetic aspects of yourself and what they can do. And it's usually through those avenues that you start to feel different things, perhaps even energetic healing with animals, right? You're starting to feel something energetically with a whole new class of beings. And that will usually lead you to more and different connections with other beings too, as you begin to sort of rewrite your belief systems about this possibility. So, now that being said, in the beginning, I was not sure if the chorus was the chorus or they were just like part of my subconscious. A lot of that was because it felt like it was too easy. When I heard their message or their response, it felt so, I don't know, inside of me that it really colluded with the sensation that I had of my internal voice. For a human at that first step, they're so close together. Like there's not a lot to distinguish them from one another. But like the chorus said, the only way to build that distinction is to continue to develop manifestations in both of those areas. Now, I would say I was not great at this because I, especially in the early years, doubled down on my experience of the course because I was sick and I was sort of really wanting to understand and to heal. But another way to do this is to balance those perspectives, meaning you play with your inner voice. So you continue to like journal or express your perspective as you continue to open up to beings or other messages or things like that. And the further these two go, the more they start to look really evidently different. I mean, even if the themes are consistent about like loving or whatever, the further you go with each, the further you realize like these are different perspectives. These are different ways of looking at something. And so that confidence or that ease or that self assurance continues to grow, which then usually begets more and different interactions with other beings. Now, I am not to the point yet that they say where the next step is then not only do you perceive the other beings, but you also are aware of what they are resonant with and you feel that difference. That's like, that goes from like an expanded consciousness of this reality and other realities to like a quadruple of like you get the different realities, but then you get the layers within each reality. I am not there yet. I've had a glimpse and it's awesome. But mostly I'm still coming around at times to sensing the difference consciously between different beings in the course and then between other different beings that I have been introduced to. And it's funny because most of the time I go into the conversation focused more on what I'm feeling and what we're communicating about. And it's funny because every now and then this little understanding bubbles up from somewhere inside of me and is like, "Oh, it's you guys." Or, "Oh, wait, you're different today." So it's not something I purposely track in each conversation because mostly in each conversation I'm focused on just sort of embracing everything that I can consciously embrace about them. But then it kind of happens naturally. The further you go, the more it just sort of bubbles up on its own. These recognitions just grow in their own way, sort of fed by the light and the water of you just continuing to experience more of those perspectives. It happens on its own. So, does that help? Or do you have any other questions about that? Linda says, great. Thank you. For sure. Have you been channeling or connecting, if I can ask? Have you been having experiences opening up to sort of that more lately? Lena says it was very helpful. I think sometimes I have found that when people begin to experience the chorus, it usually coincides with an opening. Lena says, I'm open to it, especially with the animals, but I am not quite there yet. Yeah. So this is a a prototype. It's a way of experiencing different energies. So even though it's me bringing them through, it's them and it's all of us, kind of. So I find often it's really interesting that people stumble upon the chorus sort of as a reflection of them kind of already moving in this direction. Jane says, I had one experience where I was writing and clearly it was not my voice, but I haven't been able to do that on purpose. That's so great. Um, well, it's great and it's not great, right? Because to a human, it'll be like, was that out of my control? Right. There's a moment afterwards where it's like, wait, stop everything. And that's an okay voice within us. That's that fear voice. It's a representation of where we are right now. And that's okay because we are building beliefs that assist that voice, that belief system in expanding. Um, but writing and things that we are practiced at doing when we sort of get automatic are often a way that we sort of expand to higher frequencies and that stuff sort of slips through. So it is a choice. We did go there. I know it may not seem like it from our perspective at times because it's not like we sat down to write to do that yet. But it's a reflection of being sort of in that place where the five senses mind is happy, doing something in the physical environment, and the rest of us can sort of like expand. In the first book, the Book of Human Awakening, the chorus calls this attention, the difference between focus and attention. When we are attentive, we sort of just like expand outward to the fullest extent of what we are. We often experience this by accident while we're driving a car on autopilot, or we're sort of writing and just letting stuff come out of us, singing and just letting stuff come out of us, sometimes talking. There are people who are energetically connected, like therapists and others, that they have grown accustomed to as they're talking or they're trying to help someone else to just let that instinctive sort of words come out of them. That is a start of tapping into larger energies and bringing them through. Um, so after I got sick, there was a period of time when I promised that I wouldn't channel. And, we were trying to understand what caused what and what was happening. And my family was freaked out by my channeling. And so we agreed that I wouldn't. And I didn't. I agreed to that too, because I was like, I don't know what's happening either. Seemed like a good idea to like remove variables. So I had a lot of nervous system issues and I couldn't drive, I couldn't care for myself, etc. So over a number of weeks, I gradually started healing and I was able to like shower again and then cook. And it was a real intentional like slog healing process of like, focus on what went well today, feel that healing, move on to the next day. So finally, I get behind the wheel of the car again. And the first time, I'm very nervous. I only drove about a mile from my parents' house and back again. And then I drove a little further. And after like a week or two, I drove myself to my own therapy appointment. And by this time, I had rebuilt enough of a confidence in my ability to drive that I was able to go on autopilot. And as I'm driving to my therapist appointment, I'm feeling so happy, just so relieved that, like, excuse me, I'm going to ask the course about that later. So happy and so relieved that I can drive again that I start to go into autopilot. And I'm just like feeling good, like when you're singing songs behind the wheel, right? And I go, this is so great. And then the chorus goes, isn't it though? And I was like, oh God. I had been channeling them for years and then took this break and then finally come back into sort of like a trusting, expansive place. And now you could say like they showed up in the car, but not really. I had expanded my perception back up to where they were. And so, I froze up for a second, and then I kind of realized what had happened, and I started laughing because, all this time I had had this uncertainty about, like, is it them? Is it me? Is it my subconscious? I think it's not, but I don't know. And then taking a break from them for a period of time, getting back into a happy place, and then running into them again was like, "You guys are really just there all the time, aren't you?" So, it's these experiences that build the clarity about, like, what's you versus what's them. Melinda says, "I love the way you describe that. Makes sense to expand to them versus them imposing on us." Yes, exactly. Now, there are beings that are closer to our wavelengths. And this is like an interesting situation. This is why whenever I talk to someone who's experienced a being, the first thing I start asking them is, "Well, tell me more about what you think that being believes." And that usually pulls people up. They're usually like, "What do you mean?" And it's like, "Well, think about it. Like, what did they say to you? Like, what did they express?" So, one thing that I've seen is there are some people who have begun to experience different entities, and those entities are sort of like very time imminent. They think they have to help humanity, like, it's gotta happen now. They have a message. You need to tell that other person this message that I have for them, etcetera. What's interesting is many people feel like those entities have sort of imposed themselves upon the human who perceived them. But, from an energetic perspective, that's not exactly possible. Somehow they had to meet in the middle at that frequency. They both had to be at that frequency in order to run into each other. However, could they both have rendezvoused at that frequency for an experience of beliefs of obligation and imposition? Yes, they could. So that is a good example of what the chorus is talking about today, where they're saying there's an energetic part of you that's doing stuff all the time. It is resonating here, it is moving into other places. And from this perspective that you're awakening from, you are seeing portions of that. Jane says that's really interesting. Yeah. Linda, I agree, Jane. So when I meet someone who feels very afraid of these entities, I don't argue with that experience because they are in some way benefiting from that. Now, if they ask me about it or they invite my perspective, or if I feel drawn to say something, that is a good reflection then of their energetic rendezvous with me. This goes a lot to, have you ever felt like you wanted to say something, but you shouldn't? Humans have this experience all the time. There's stuff all the time that we're like, we think we should say, but we don't. Do we say it, but do we not? And a lot of that has to do with sort of like our starting and fits and spurts of feeling an energetic perception and then tying it into our belief systems. We have a lot of beliefs about what can and cannot be said. Tons, just galaxies worth. There is an entire social protocol that underlies all the interactions within our civilization. And we don't think of it often as that restrictive because we're not consciously aware of all the other ways that many other civilizations are open to and convey information. One thing that the chorus said to me very early on was, if you have resonated with a question, if anyone has resonated with a question, they are deserving of the answer. Like, they're already there. And we don't necessarily believe that in all times and all places. So there are children who ask us questions that we're like, "Oh, we'll give you like the kiddo version." When in actuality, anytime anyone has vibrated to a place of asking that question, they are also ready for the answer. But it's so subconscious to us that we may not even contemplate their energetic place. We think about the impact of what would happen if we gave them that answer. So I experience this still when I watch other people meet other beings. And they're like, this being is so intrusive. They show up all the time. They interrupt me. And that's true because they are having an experience of sort of not trusting their own perspective or being imposed upon or fear. I mean, it's powerful. They are experiencing a lot of things. And also, they could not have perceived that being if they had not rendezvoused with that being on that frequency. So then that's where you start to be like, well, what do you think that being believes? And they're sort of like, well, I don't know. And it's like, well, what did they say? And they were like, well, they said that they had these messages and I had to deliver it to humanity. And I was like, oh, deadlines. Yeah, I believe in deadlines. That being's got a deadline. Like there's a ticking clock. Like we're not that different. I share in that experience. What else did they say? Well, humanity is suffering and they really want me to deliver these messages to end humanity's suffering. And it's like, oh, okay. They believe in suffering too, in the experience of suffering and needing to stop it. I have too. I have a really hard time seeing someone else suffer. There's something in me that needs to stop that. Right? So as you start to identify what you're communicating with at these energetic levels, like where are they resonating and where am I resonating? It shifts it up from the five senses experience of like they keep showing up in the middle of the night and it's annoying me. One way that we have started to embrace this is you will hear other channels or mediums say to establish boundaries and guidelines. So say, don't bother me in the middle of the night. This is too much. You need to slow it down, right? So you start to voice your perspective in that interaction. And that's a good first step forward in recognizing that you hold a perspective and they hold a perspective and you are meeting somewhere in the middle. Um, and, I would say that experience of needing to set boundaries and guidelines is also what the course would say another human experience. Remember, they're talking about humans from all of us who agree with these beliefs. We talk about humans as in humanoids that look like this. So, as you start to meet other beings, it's a wild experience because you start to recognize their similarities to you from a belief system perspective. And then, even though they're invisible or they're all energetic or who knows, you can't see them yet, you feel an understanding of them and how to communicate with them because they're not that far off of our beliefs. Jane says boundaries in the boundless. Exactly. Now, here's the difference with the chorus. Do you all feel like you would need to set a boundary with them? Like, do you feel like the chorus would show up one day and be like, look, you got to do this? Well, it just like, no. Yeah. So there is a felt difference. So energetically, you are already doing this because even though it's me channeling, you are sensing the difference between me. I'm an energetic being. I mean, I'm also here, but I had to resonate here. You're sensing the difference between me as an energetic being and the chorus as an energetic being. Now, I might call you up and be like, I'm starving. We need to order takeout in the next 15 minutes. Right? Would be a felt understanding because, yes, I believe in finite time and eating and feels totally normal. But it feels odd to think that the chorus might ever do that. They're so at ease. They're so loving. They think everything we do is great. So that felt difference of like, you might have to put boundaries in place with me, especially when I'm hangry. I can't just burst into your office and say it's time to order takeout, right? You feel that about me and my belief systems. And you also feel that already about the chorus. That is an energetic perception. You are already sensing and vaster wavelengths more about these entities and then also about each other too. So, any other questions about that? I could talk about this all day. Melinda, have you started learning new vocabulary about how to talk about this? Yes and no. So I'll be honest, some words have been given to me that sound so silly to me that I haven't talked about them yet. Um, and that is a reflection. So, absurdity, sense of absurdity is a reflection of a dismissal by the belief system complex. So, I know that in continuing to contemplate those words, I am integrating them into my beliefs to where they'll start to feel more appropriate and applicable. And once I reach that point, then I feel like it's time. It's time to start using those words. Um, in I mean, besides that, up until, that point, I'd say I'm just working with the vocabulary that we have and trying to say it in different ways. And that usually helps people who are just coming to this. A lot of beliefs get activated when we encounter a new manifestation. There's like an uptick in judgment and evaluation. And that's exactly what the chorus tries to step around, is activating our judgments. They very gently are just like, look over here. And then people can actually receive it and be like, oh, I hadn't thought about that way. So I think in the beginning, it is helpful to use the vocabulary that others are already using to describe a new concept. And then as they open to that, then you can introduce a new piece of vocabulary because they've already built all the beliefs about the possibility of these concepts being true or useful or beneficial. So I've been given a lot of words about, not a lot, I've been given a handful of words about our history. And that's hard, even for me, because our history is something that we strongly identify with subconsciously and consciously. So I think more of those terms about these prior civilizations that we were or experienced will be coming through at a time when we're ready to open to the idea of aspects of our history that up until now we had intentionally forgotten, maybe I'll say. So Melinda says, or Jane says, in Reiki, we talk about the second heaven being that exactly, beings who are close to us. Yes, they're here. Said another way, we're there, right? Yes. Melinda says, like the sensation specifically, I was feeling like you have an energetic denseness. And when I feel into the chorus, I feel vastness that feels limited to our five senses. I love listening to them talk about that in the last podcast about the history. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think the more time you spend with the chorus, the more evidently dense all that we are and do becomes, because it is. But it's really by virtue of that contrast that we start to bring ourselves more and more clarity about just how dense it is and has been. And you don't really want to rush that process, because if it becomes so obviously dense or challenging too quickly, that activates a lot of our beliefs and we'll throw ourselves in an energetic eddy, which is depression. So we will often feel overwhelmed or depressed, like, fuck, how do I get out of here? Right? Have you ever felt that? Ooh, that comes after an accelerating experience where you have opened up to something very quickly. And then as you come back into the belief systems and try to integrate it, there's a little bit of like a friction of like, you need to let more time pass to integrate all this, because that was a whole lot of energy and the belief systems don't allow energy. So there's a harmony and a balance as those things happen. And Lena says, oh, patience. Yes, and you're doing it by going through it. We don't yet construe depression as very productive, but it is. And as our healers begin to describe and to be able to share with others more and more the awakening process that they're going through, that will ease a lot of the judgment and the frictions that we have over that. So Jane applauds. Yes. So oftentimes as we have these expansive perspectives, we come back in, we get depressed, and some people spend years sort of in this cycle where they start to lift and they come right back down into depression. Um, right now, depression is still something to be thwarted or to be avoided. And actually, it is extremely productive. There are so many beliefs that get rewritten through an intense period of depression. But we need this whole construct. We need this whole understanding in order for that explanation to not only make sense, but feel validating, right? The more we have experiences of energetically understanding ourselves and then the action of the belief systems that we are rewriting or evolving from, the more then when somebody says, actually, your depression is really productive, you're doing something very important right now, it doesn't feel like blowing sunshine up their ass. When somebody tries to get rid of your depression, that's feeling of friction of like, don't be depressed, right? They're pushing against it. That actually energizes the depression even more. This is an alternate. This is a validation of the depression from the perception that it does not need to be rejected or thwarted. This is very hard for us right now because we don't like the sensation of depression, mainly driven by the beliefs that judge it to be something that we do not want or should not have. As those beliefs soften, the experience of depression will also soften. And this may be like an extreme version, but it goes from being like curled on the couch in the fetal position, buried in shame, to sort of like moving into a spa like experience in these healing places where the depression is embraced as sort of like a temporary, powerful rest. That there are many things happening. And so, can you imagine if when you got depressed, you got to like take a break from everything else because you're already doing so much and like the universe manifestations just aligned for you to like be in the spa, right? And yeah, Melinda said depressed equals deep rest. Yes, because so much is happening energetically and then into yourself and energetically and into yourself that there's not a lot of other bandwidth. There's not a lot of other beliefs accessible by that person to continue to function in a normal five senses way while going through such an extreme acceleration. It's hard to be energetically connected, moving through so much, and then still active in the belief systems in the same way. So, what happens is there is an experience that sets the depressed person apart. This is collective wide. This is how our consensus has done it to date. As a way of not violating the rules of the game, we have an experience of depression where that person sets themselves apart in many ways from social situations, work situation. As those belief systems change, it will be far easier for depressed people to still integrate and to be active in the five senses world because this difference won't be so extreme. The five senses belief systems will be more supportive of lesser action, acceleration, things that will make it easier for a person to be in that depressed state, feeling slightly differently, and interacting with those who are not energetically accelerating at that time. Jane says, when I can do this, the depression lasts less time. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Because time is our construct of slowing down new energy or the perception of it. Linear time, our time, wherever you want to start talking about, because this construct has evolved. Okay, so linear time is our way of slowing things down. Things take time in our reality. So if you were going through a major energetic shift decades ago, that depression might have been acute and long lasting and taken a lot of time. Now we are finding that those of us who are moving into these energetic wavelengths can bounce in and out of it more quickly, especially the more we allow it especially the more we see the value of it, the byproducts of it, these are all manifestations that allow us to have a different experience of depression without violating the rules of the game. And then what happens is that starts to become more pervasive. That experience of depression becomes more possible worldwide. And so, you know how it is when you see an example of someone having done something that opens you up to the possibility of like, oh, so we're going to start collecting more and more of this evidence that depression is doing a lot more than we thought it would. It is something to be perhaps celebrated, adored. It doesn't have to be as heavy as it used to be. So then people are going to start coming in and out of depression faster. Or also that we might call it something different because the sensations of it have evolved so much that it doesn't count as depression in the same five senses way that it did before. But what is required often is that collection of manifestations that make that thing more possible for the entire group consensus, which means there are a bunch of us who have struggled with depression over these recent decades that through each of our experience of depression have contributed to the pile of manifestations where we have had to revisit depression and come out again, revisit and come out again. And through that, see all of these things, manifest all of these things, and make them real for others to access later on. So the Course has talked about this once or twice before, but healers, by their view, are those who write new belief systems that allow us to receive new energy in more clear and direct ways. That's what a healer is to them. So when you validate someone's illness, when you show them what else it could be doing, you lighten that experience of illness without actually like targeting or trying to do away with the five senses illness. You're going to root cause, which is the beliefs. Melina said, I love that definition of a healer. Jane, can you say that again? Oh, yes. Never sure what comes out of my mouth. So, by view of the Chorus, healers are those who help each of us to access new beliefs in this five senses reality that will morph our experience of the illness. So, those beliefs can be beliefs like we just talked about in terms of depression, where you are showing them a different perspective of depression that softens that need to fight against it and thus energize it. So when we say, hey, we have this whole construct of a belief system complex, how this all works, and guess what? Depression fits into this and it's very productive. You are getting a lot done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can feel how they're sort of lightening on the need to stop the depression. And in so doing, you could say they heal the depression. So right now, I'm sure as many of you watching this know, our medicine focuses on doing away with the disease, broadly speaking, right? And so this is a shift into seeing the disease and its characteristics and what it's accomplishing from a new perspective that creates a viable path in our belief system to accept it and to allow it. So you feel it's like it's pie in the sky, kind of like what we've always talked about, but now this is dropping down into our beliefs. So you can imagine today if you told someone like, oh, you shouldn't be upset about the cancer. It's fine. Like, it's great, actually. I'm sure it's really serving you. Okay, so that still feels like do away with your fear about the cancer. Do you feel it? Do you feel that subtle, like, don't be afraid of the cancer? It's still slightly against the disease. Okay, so then now we have sort of like wellness and meditation and yoga where we sort of have like this disease must be telling me something. Have you got enough? We've talked to people about that where they say like, okay, this is bringing about a change in my life. See how it feels a little more allowing? The words in the first example were like, "This cancer is fine," but it's still dismissive. The next energy is sort of like an openness to the potential of like, "Yes," but there's still an uncertainty. There's still like, "It must be doing something because I really hope that it is, because otherwise I don't understand why I got cancer." But it's progress, right? And then the next phase will be sort of these manifestations, real evidence from many of us who have gone before, where we have transcended the disease. And by way of that, have begun to experience other energetic aspects of ourself that are real and are presentable. And so now you get to this place and you say, depression is productive. Depression is doing these things. I can write a whole book about it. I can show you myself. I can show you the evidence of what I came through. Now, when you say this cancer is accomplishing these things and it's important and it's incredible, that is a totally different belief that then allows the person to experience the cancer in a different way. Maybe it would be less acute. Maybe it would take less time. It's a healing by way of the belief systems as opposed to trying to attack or do away with the disease or the symptoms of the disease. Linda says, yes, yes, I am so excited for these days. Jane says, thank you. Thank you. Um, I think, we're on the cusp of it. I think it's already starting to happen. I think there are many of us who are coming, like we're talking about, into contact with these other beings. And that's a reflection of how far we've come in our energetic perceptions. And so I feel like these things will follow along behind us um, quite quickly. I don't know, depending on how you look at it, because we are evolving in our experience of time collectively. So I think that opens the door for some of these solutions to come through more quickly. Whereas before it might have taken us decades to gather this evidence and to prove this point, now it can be received by others in a more rapid way. So I think the potential is incredible. It's super exciting. So thank you both for joining today. It was so fun, as always. Lena says thank you. Thank you. Jane, thank you. And I think we might have to go every other week for a little while because we're packing up the house and moving. moving. So I'll keep you guys updated in the Facebook group or also on the Crowdcast. And we look forward to talking to you soon. Melissa says, good luck with the move. Thank you. I will take all the good vibes. Good luck with that. Thank you. Thank you guys very much. Good to be with you all. Talk to you soon. Bye.